Anna could not let go of that piece of soap, even after the water cooled and the steam began to fade. She held it like a relic, her fingers softening against the lather, until the edges rounded smooth. The weight of it, though, slight pressed heavily on her chest. She wrapped herself in the rough towel the guards had provided and walked back to the barracks with her thoughts churning like restless waters. That single bar had unsettled her more than the journey across the Atlantic, more than the moment she was marched into camp surrounded by strange voices and unfamiliar uniforms. It carried the quiet power of proof that what she had believed, what she had been told, could not hold. When she first boarded the transport ship, Anna had braced herself for cruelty. She remembered whispering prayers in the dark, gripping the sleeve of her friend Greta, another clerk taken from a half-destroyed office in Frankfurt. They had spoken of hunger, of hard labor, of shame. Never once had they imagined showers with warm water or soap perfumed like spring. The voyage had been filled with dread. Each hour, closer to America, felt like a descent into some unknown abyss, where humiliation and pain would define every moment. She had closed her eyes tightly each night, determined not to let fear break her, only to find herself breaking anyway under the weight of uncertainty. The camp gates had loomed like the mouth of a beast, and the guards' voices, though not cruel, cut through her with every order. She had expected blows, insults, the kind of treatment her own countrymen had inflicted on prisoners they captured. Instead, the American soldiers kept their distance, their commands brisk but not brutal. Still, Anna had clung to her suspicions. She told herself it was a game, a trick to lure them into weakness before the real suffering began. That first night, when she saw electric light pouring through the barracks, long after dark, she had hidden her face in the blanket, too afraid to believe the switch would work without punishment. The shower changed everything. It was not simply about soap or hot water. It was the realization that the enemy she had been told to fear had no reason to starve her, to freeze her, or to strip her of dignity. That realization unsettled her far more than the prospect of cruelty ever had. Cruelty she could have endured. It would have fit the story she had been raised with. Kindness, or perhaps indifference wrapped in abundance, left her adrift, uncertain of where she stood. The days that followed carried the same quiet strangeness. Meals appeared 3 times a day, trays filled with food that seemed impossible given the shortages she remembered back home. Bread with butter, vegetables, still crisp meat that filled the air with rich scents. The first time she saw milk served in tall glasses, her stomach clenched in rebellion. Milk had become a memory in Germany by the final years of the war. She lifted the glass slowly, her hand trembling, and the taste was so vivid she nearly choked. That night she lay awake, the flavor of milk haunting her more than any nightmare. Her thoughts returned again and again to her family in Hamburg. Her mother's hollow cheeks, her father's weary shoulders, as he queued for rations, her younger brother coughing through the cold nights without medicine. Anna imagined their disbelief if she told them that here as a prisoner she had eaten more in 1 week than they had in a month. Guilt gnawed at her. She wanted to send the food across the ocean, to trade her portion for a crust that might reach her mother's hands. Each bite left her both nourished and ashamed. The barracks echoed with similar confusion. Some women whispered that it was all a staged performance, that the abundance would vanish once propaganda photographs were taken. Others insisted that the Americans had no need for deception. They lived like this every day. Greta tried to keep her spirits high, laughing softly at the absurdity of ice cream being served in a prison camp. But Anna saw the shadows in her friend's eyes when she thought no one was looking. Even Greta could not escape the silent dread that their world had been built on lies. Night after night, Anna replayed the warnings she had memorized back home. Teachers, newspapers, speeches, each had painted the enemy as decadent and weak, crumbling beneath their own luxuries. And yet here in the heart of America, luxury was not weakness but strength. The lights never flickered, the warehouses overflowed, and the guards seemed almost casual in their confidence. They were not men desperate to prove their dominance. They were men certain of resources without limit. That certainty was its own kind of power, heavier than guns or bombs. Anna tried to shield herself from the full weight of these realizations, but it was impossible. Each new detail cut another thread from the fabric of her old beliefs. She remembered the pride she once felt typing reports about victories at the front, smiling when the officers praised Germany's discipline. Now those memories turned bitter. Had she been nothing more than a cog in a machine fueled by illusions? Her chest tightened when she thought of the sacrifices she and so many others had made, sacrifices demanded in the name of a strength that had never truly existed. Her nights became restless. She would rise from her cot, pacing the narrow aisle of the barracks, tracing her fingers along the wooden beams, as if searching for hidden cracks in reality. Sometimes she pressed the light switch again and again, marveling at the way the bulb glowed each time without fail. It felt like proof of a different kind of truth, one she could not deny but did not yet know how to accept. She felt as though the world outside was collapsing, while inside the camp she had stumbled into a future she was not prepared to see. The unease grew heavier with each passing day. When she saw a maintenance worker discard a dented metal cup rather than repair it, her stomach twisted. In Germany, that cup would have been mended until it could hold nothing at all, then melted down for the war effort. Here it was thrown away without thought, replaced by another. Waste, yes, but waste born of an abundance her homeland could never hope to match. She stared at the discarded cup until the guard called her away, the image seared into her memory like a wound. And always the soap remained in her mind. Each time she bathed, she turned it over in her hands, half expecting someone to snatch it away, to laugh at her foolishness for believing she deserved it. No one ever did. Each week, another bar was given to her, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. That ordinary generosity cut deeper than cruelty could have. It told her without words that she had been wrong, that everything she thought she knew about her enemy was built on sand. Anna began to realize that her struggle was not with the guards or the camp, but with herself. The war had left her body thin, her heart cautious, her faith in her homeland unquestioned. Now her body grew stronger with food and care, while her faith dissolved like soap in water. She felt suspended between two worlds, one collapsing behind her and another rising before her, uncertain if she belonged in either. The barracks were quiet at night, but inside her chest a storm gathered, restless and unrelenting. The first bar of soap had been only the beginning. She understood that now. It was a doorway into truths. She was not ready to face truths that threatened to unmake her and rebuild her into someone she did not yet recognize. What else would she discover here? What other illusions would fall away until nothing of her old self remained? The thought filled her with dread and with a strange, aching anticipation. She lay awake, the scent of lavender lingering on her skin, and whispered to herself the question she feared most of all. If everything I believed was a lie, then who am I now? The days blurred into one another, yet each moment carried a weight that Anna could not set down. The soap had shaken her, the first meals had unsettled her, but what followed pressed against her mind like a tide she could not resist. She walked into the dining hall the second morning, her body still trembling from restless sleep, and found the same trays waiting, steaming and full. A slab of pork chop rested beside potatoes glistening with butter, green beans vibrant in color, bread warm and soft with a pat of melting cream, and a glass of milk that gleamed under the lamps. Anna froze her fingers, hovering above the tray, as if reaching for it might invite some cruel joke. She turned, scanning the faces of the guards, searching for the smirk that would reveal this as a trap, but saw nothing but indifference. This was food, nothing more, nothing less. And that was the terror of it. It was real. She carried the tray back to her seat, her legs unsteady, her pulse racing. Greta whispered a prayer before touching her fork, her voice breaking with gratitude and fear all at once. Around them, the women muttered in disbelief, some refusing to eat until hunger forced their hands. Anna stared at the apple on her plate, its skin red and perfect, and tears stung her eyes. She remembered her mother cutting bruised fruit into thin slices to make it last a week, remembered her little brother licking the peel for sweetness. Now she sat in a prison camp holding an apple more flawless than any her family could hope to see. Shame clawed through her chest as she took a bite, the crisp sound echoing like a betrayal. That night, she could not sleep. Her body suddenly full rebelled against the abundance. She pressed her hands against her stomach as if to hide the truth from herself. She had eaten too much and it felt like a sin. The next day it happened again, and the day after. Each meal brought the same surreal comfort, the same torment. It was not a special occasion, not a trick for photographs. It was Tuesday food, Friday food, ordinary food. When Greta whispered that ice cream was served at the end of the week, Anna nearly laughed aloud, though the sound came out broken, almost hysterical. Ice cream in a prison camp, while her homeland starved beneath the bombs. The contradictions multiplied. She had expected the guards to sneer, to lash out, to use hunger and cold as weapons. Instead, she saw them eating the same meals, drinking the same milk, treating the abundance as though it were air so natural they did not even notice it. Anna could not understand. How could they waste so much, discard leftovers, scrape plates into bins without hesitation, when in Hamburg families survived on scraps and ash? Each act of waste felt like a wound, a reminder of how wide the chasm was between what she had been told and what her eyes now witnessed. Her health began to shift against her will. The hollowness in her cheeks softened, color returned to her skin, and she felt her strength growing. At night she bit her lip until it bled, ashamed that her body thrived while her people wasted away. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hide from Greta, from the other women, from herself. She wanted to shrink, to stay thin and gaunt as proof of loyalty, but the food forced itself upon her, relentless in its generosity. No punishment followed if she ate, no reward if she resisted. Only hunger, only guilt. And then came the infirmary. The first time she stepped inside called for a routine examination. Anna braced herself for coldness, for disdain. Instead, she was met with warmth. The American doctor, his voice calm, checked her pulse, her eyes, her lungs. He wrote notes and asked questions through the interpreter with no trace of cruelty. When he looked into her mouth and called for a dentist, Anna's heart raced with panic. The dentist worked gently, filling cavities, repairing what had been neglected for years. She gripped the chair, her body tense, expecting pain, but instead felt something far stranger: relief. For the first time since her teenage years, she could chew without agony. She walked out trembling, clutching the small packet of vitamins they had given her as though it might dissolve in her hands before she reached the barracks. Vitamins, simple pills, yet more precious than gold to her memory of home. In Hamburg, mothers wept because their children's bodies withered from lack of nutrients, because medicine had vanished from the shelves long ago. Here she had been given more than she had ever seen, freely, without question. She held the pills close, her vision blurring with tears. The other women spoke in hushed voices, their disbelief spreading like a fever. Some refused treatment at first, certain that hidden poisons lingered in the bottles. But the weeks proved otherwise. Malnourished bodies grew stronger, pale faces regained color, coughs softened wounds, healed. Their very health became evidence that shattered everything they had carried into the camp. Anna watched as Greta, once hollow-eyed and weak, began to smile again. The sight broke her heart. Joy mixed with sorrow, because Greta's recovery meant that the stories they had trusted, the certainty of German superiority, the weakness of their enemies, were unraveling strand by strand. The barracks buzzed at night. Women whispered of the supplies they had seen: rows of antibiotics, shelves of bandages, cabinets filled with medicines enough to save entire hospitals back home. They whispered of guards casually tossing aside broken utensils, of electric lights burning long past midnight, of showers hot enough to steam the glass. Every detail added weight to the truth pressing down on them. They could no longer cling to denial. The Americans did not need tricks. Their abundance was real, and it was crushing. Anna felt the collapse within herself, like a house of cards folding under a breath. She had been told. Her nation stood firm, bound by discipline and sacrifice. But what was discipline against warehouses of food, against endless electricity, against medicine, stacked higher than her head? She tried to pray, but the words tangled on her tongue. Her faith was shaken not in God but in everything she had once trusted about her homeland. One night, lying awake with Greta beside her, Anna whispered the question that haunted them all. If this is ordinary for them, then what is left for us? Greta said nothing. Her silence was answer enough. From that night forward, Anna could not see the camp as merely a place of captivity. It had become a mirror reflecting the hollowness of her past beliefs. Every meal, every pill, every light bulb that glowed without fail deepened the ache in her chest. She was not only a prisoner of war, she was a prisoner of realization, trapped between what she had been told and what she could no longer deny. The soap had been the first crack. The food, the medicine, the light, each one widened the fracture until she feared there would be nothing left of her old self to hold together. And yet beneath the fear, a new hunger stirred, not just for bread or milk, but for truth. She wanted to know how deep this abundance went, how far the lies of her homeland had stretched. She wanted to understand, even as the knowing tore her apart. The barracks slept around her, breath steady in the dark, but Anna lay awake, heart pounding. Tomorrow would bring another tray, another test, another quiet blow to the world she had once believed in. The truth was relentless, and it would not stop. Anna thought the storm inside her chest could not grow stronger, but it did. The soap had cracked her certainty, the food and medicine had broken it wider, and now she stood at the edge of something far more terrifying, the collapse of everything she had believed. It was no longer a matter of comfort or hunger. It was a battle in her mind, a relentless clash between the stories of her past and the undeniable truth of her present. Each day in the camp pulled her further into that conflict, and each night she felt herself unraveling. It began with questions whispered in the barracks when the lamps dimmed and the guards' footsteps faded. Why would they feed us like this? Greta asked one night, her voice raw. Why waste so much on enemies? No one had an answer. Some insisted it was a trick, a play meant to soften them for interrogation. But the weeks dragged on, and the abundance never ceased. The ice cream came every Friday. The bread arrived fresh each morning. The shelves in the infirmary stayed full. If this was a trick, it was one carried out with impossible discipline and endless resources. Anna could not silence her own doubts. She remembered the words of her teachers, the bold proclamations of her country's leaders. America was decadent, soft, fragile. They would collapse under hardship, while Germany, pure and disciplined, would endure. Yet what she saw each day was not weakness but strength so vast it suffocated her. The guards, the nurses, even the cooks, moved with a confidence that came not from arrogance, but from certainty, the kind of certainty born of knowing that nothing would run out. They did not fear shortages, because shortages did not exist here. She began to write in her mind, though she had no paper, no pen. She counted portions, memorized the sizes of bread slices measured in her thoughts, the gallons of water that poured from showers. She calculated, compared, tried to frame what she saw in numbers. But the numbers were monstrous. They mocked the rationing she had endured at home, mocked the patriotic campaigns that had begged for every scrap of metal and every ounce of sacrifice. One discarded aluminum tray here equaled days of pleading on the streets of Hamburg. One shelf of medicine here outweighed an entire hospital back home. Each fact, each comparison pulled her further from her old world and deeper into despair. The other women saw it too. They began to gather, not to resist, not to plot escape, but to share what they had witnessed. They compared details like investigators piecing together evidence of an unbearable truth. One spoke of a storeroom filled with canned goods stacked higher than her head. Another described the ease with which an electrician replaced a broken light fixture, drawing on supplies that seemed endless. Anna listened, her heart pounding as they shared their observations. The more they spoke, the clearer it became. America's strength was not a facade. It was reality, and that reality made their defeat inevitable. Anna's chest ached as she recalled her father's words before she left for service. Remember, child, our will is iron. The enemy will collapse under their own indulgence. She had clung to those words as armor carrying them through the bombings, through the hunger, through the nights when the sirens wailed and the sky burned. Now those words felt like ash in her mouth. She wanted to believe. Her father wanted to hold on to his certainty, but the camp itself tore it from her hands. Every meal, every light bulb, every bar of soap screamed the same truth. Her homeland had lied. The breaking point came in the infirmary. She had returned for another examination, still uneasy, though she had grown accustomed to the routine. The American doctor asked the interpreter to explain that her lungs were stronger, her weight healthier. Then he opened a cabinet searching for something, and Anna's eyes widened. Shelves upon shelves of antibiotics filled the space bottles and boxes more than she had seen in all her years combined. Her throat closed. She had worked in offices that rationed medication by the milligram, had seen children turned away from hospitals because supplies had vanished. And here in a single cabinet, meant for fewer than 100 prisoners, there was enough to save entire neighborhoods. Her knees weakened, and she gripped the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. That night she could not stop shaking. Greta tried to soothe her, pressing a hand against her arm. But Anna pulled away, her mind spinning too fast. She lay awake, staring at the wooden beams above her, counting them again and again, like a prayer. "It's true," she whispered to herself. "Everything they told us was a lie." The words felt like betrayal, yet they were the only truth left. The days turned into a torrent of revelation. Each sight, each sound, each small act of waste or ease drove the lesson deeper. She watched a worker discard a bucket because the handle had snapped, and she nearly screamed. She saw a guard turn on an electric fan in the summer heat, something that felt like sorcery to her, and she bit her lip until it bled. Every detail became another hammer striking the fragile shell of her beliefs. Some women broke under the weight. They wept openly, clutched rosaries until their hands bled, or withdrew into silence. Others turned to anger, cursing their leaders, cursing the lies that had led them here. Anna drifted between both states, grief and fury consuming her by turns. She could not speak of home without trembling. She could not pray without choking. The thought of her family starving while she grew stronger filled her with a guilt that burned hotter than hunger ever had. Yet beneath the anguish, a new awareness began to take root. She could not name it, could not accept it, but it lived inside her nonetheless. It was the sense that survival here meant more than food or medicine. Survival meant facing the truth, no matter how unbearable. It meant tearing away the layers of falsehood that had been wrapped around her since childhood. And that truth was merciless. America's abundance was not weakness, it was power. Her country had never stood a chance. Anna's eyes darkened as she faced the reality she could not escape. Each morning she awoke to trays of food her family would never see, to lights that burned without fail, to doctors who treated her as though her life mattered. Each night she lay awake, torn between gratitude and grief, between the warmth of survival and the cold weight of betrayal. She had crossed an invisible line, now no longer merely a prisoner of war, but a prisoner of truth. The soap had been the beginning, the meals and medicine the proof. But this collapse of belief, this storm of despair and awakening, was the turning point. She was no longer fighting hunger or fear. She was fighting herself, her past, her faith in a nation that had crumbled before her eyes. And as she lay in the dark trembling, she understood with a clarity that left her breathless. There was no going back. The person she had been was gone, dissolved in lather, drowned in milk, crushed beneath shelves of medicine. What remained was fragile, uncertain, and terrified. But it was real, and it would have to endure. Anna Muller stood frozen beneath the warm spray of water, her trembling hands clutching a bar of soap so white it almost glowed. She was 24 years old, once a clerk in a German military office, now a prisoner of war in America. The steam curled around her face, the scent of lavender rising with every lather, and she felt her throat tighten. For years, she had been told that Americans would treat her kind like animals, stripping away dignity until nothing remained. Yet here she was, barefoot, on clean tile, holding more soap in her hands than her family in Hamburg had seen in months. The contradiction left her unsettled, as if the floor itself might vanish beneath her. She had been raised to believe that America was weak, soft-built on excess, that would collapse in the face of German discipline. Every newspaper, every speech insisted that the enemy lived in waste and decadence, while the Reich endured through sacrifice. But the moment the water cascaded over her shoulders, Anna felt those lessons cracking. Instead of cruelty, she found comfort. Instead of contempt, she found abundance offered without hesitation. The warmth pressed against her thin body, and for the first time since capture, tears slipped down her cheeks, not from pain, but from confusion. Outside the walls of this camp, she knew her country was collapsing under bombs and hunger. Inside, she confronted a reality she could not deny. Her captors lived in a world of resources that Germany could never match. The soap in her palm was not just soap, it was proof that everything she had believed might be wrong. And as she stood there trembling, she wondered what other truths awaited her, truths that could shatter or remake the very core of who she was. Anna no longer felt alone in her collapse. Around her, the barracks swelled with the same uneasy whispers, the same haunted stares. It was not just her heart unraveling, it was all of them. The women had begun to gather in corners, huddled beneath dim lamps, their voices low but urgent. They were not planning escape, not weaving plots of resistance. No, what bound them together now was something darker and more suffocating. The need to make sense of what they were seeing. The need to measure the impossible abundance surrounding them. It started with Greta, who began writing figures in the dirt, with a stick tallying loaves of bread, glasses of milk, the number of meat portions delivered each day. Others added details, recalling what they had glimpsed in storerooms and kitchens in the infirmary. Anna listened with her chest tight as they compared notes, their voices trembling with equal parts fear and awe. This one cabinet whispered a nurse would have supplied my entire hospital for months. Another woman, once an engineer's assistant, described the sheer scale of wiring and metal she had seen in the maintenance rooms. They use aluminum, like we use wood, she muttered, shaking her head. Anna found herself swept into this collective obsession. She memorized every detail she could, turning her eyes into instruments of calculation. She measured bread slices against her palm, counted the seconds the showers ran hot, noted how often broken items were replaced. Every observation felt like another nail sealing the coffin of her old beliefs. Each whisper in the barracks became part of an unspoken record, a ledger of truths too heavy to carry, but impossible to ignore. The atmosphere thickened with dread. Women who had once spoken with pride about their homeland now sat silent, staring at the floor. The chatter of resistance, of waiting for Germany's inevitable triumph, evaporated. In its place grew a grim consensus, voiced only in murmurs: Germany could not win. Not against this. The weight of that realization pressed down on them, crushing what little spirit they had left. Anna felt it in her bones, the way silence stretched longer each night, the way eyes glistened with unshed tears when someone mentioned home. It was Greta who finally said what none of them dared. If they can feed prisoners like this, then what chance do we have? Our cities are rubble. Our children are starving. And here, they throw food away. The words hit the barracks like a hammer. No one contradicted her. No one dared. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating, broken only by the sound of Anna's own heart pounding in her ears. The Americans seemed unaware of the storm they had unleashed. To them, this was routine, nothing extraordinary. Guards laughed, casually cooks sang while stirring pots, medics moved with ease through corridors lined with supplies. Their very indifference was crushing, for it proved the abundance was not staged or special. It was normal. Anna could not bear it. She wanted them to show effort, to reveal strain, to prove that somewhere, somehow, their strength had a limit. But the limit never came. At night, Anna's mind spun with images she could not silence. She saw her mother standing in line for bread, clutching a ration card, her face drawn in gray. She saw her brother's hollow frame shivering in the cold. Then she saw the camp kitchen, steaming trays tossed into bins, milk spilling over edges, light bulbs burning into the early hours without thought of cost. The two visions collided violently in her head, tearing her apart. She pressed her face into her pillow, biting down on the fabric to stifle the sobs. The group gatherings grew more fevered, more desperate. Some women took on roles like investigators, charting details, comparing patterns, trying to make sense of the scale. "This is not just strength," whispered one former logistics officer. "This is something we cannot fight. Our spirit, our sacrifices, they mean nothing against this." The words echoed in Anna's chest like thunder. She wanted to resist to protest, but the evidence around her was merciless. She saw it every morning, every night, in every bar of soap, every plate of food, every pill handed out without hesitation. The barracks had become both sanctuary and prison, a place where women clung to one another as they confronted the collapse of their world. Anna felt herself pulled deeper into their shared despair, her own voice joining theirs in whispered reckonings. They were prisoners, yes, but more than that, they were witnesses, unwilling, chroniclers of their nation's inevitable downfall. And in that collective silence, heavy with dread and disbelief, Anna understood the cruelest truth of all. The war was already lost long before she ever stepped into that shower with the bar of soap in her trembling hands. The silence in the barracks did not last. It turned into something sharper, heavier, a force that pushed the women toward one another in ways none of them had expected. What began as whispers of disbelief became hushed gatherings, circles of pale faces lit by the dim glow of lamps, voices quick and urgent. They were no longer speaking of escape, nor of victory, nor of waiting for their homeland to rescue them. Instead, they were teaching each other how to endure the truth. Anna sat among them, her hands clenched in her lap, listening as the older prisoners leaned close to the new arrivals, telling them what they would soon discover. "You must prepare yourselves," one said, her eyes fixed on the wooden floor. "Everything you believed about America is false. They are not weak. They are not starving. Their waste is greater than our rations. Do not think the meals are for propaganda. This is what they call ordinary." The words fell like stones into Anna's chest. She saw the newcomers stiffen, saw their eyes widen in fear, but she also saw them listen, truly listen. It was impossible not to. The evidence surrounded them every moment. Anna remembered her own first days in the camp, how she had trembled holding the bar of soap, how she had wept over a single apple. Now she watched others walk the same path, shock, denial, despair, and she felt both pity and dread. She wanted to comfort them, but she also knew comfort was impossible. The truth was too heavy to soften. Instead, she found herself repeating the same words the others had spoken to her. Look closely. Count everything. Understand what it means. The camp itself had become a classroom, its lessons taught not by guards or doctors, but by abundance. Every loaf of bread, every shelf of medicine, every glowing light bulb was part of the curriculum. The women became unwilling students, learning with each passing day that their homeland had never stood a chance. Some wrote figures in secret journals, scratching notes into scraps of paper with stolen pencils. Others memorized patterns, tallying portions in their minds. Anna joined them, unable to stop herself, compelled by the need to document what was tearing her apart. The tension grew unbearable. Women argued in low voices, torn between fury at their leaders and shame for believing the lies. One night, Greta slammed her fist against the wall, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They told us we were stronger," she cried. "They told us sacrifice would make us unbreakable. And now look at us fatting on enemy food while our families starve." The outburst shattered what little calm remained. Some wept, others shouted their grief, spilling into rage. Anna sat frozen, her breath shallow, unable to escape the echo of Greta's words. What cut the deepest was how quickly the process repeated itself. Each transport of new prisoners brought fresh faces, eyes filled with suspicion and fear. Within days, sometimes even hours, those same eyes, clouded with the same despair, the same hollow realization. The veterans of the camp did not need weeks to convince them. A single meal, a single shower, a single glimpse of the storerooms was enough. It was as if the abundance itself had become an unrelenting hammer, striking down every shred of propaganda, crushing belief after belief until nothing remained. Anna began to dread the arrivals. She could not bear to watch the cycle play out again and again. Yet each time she found herself drawn into the circles, speaking softly to women she barely knew. She told them about the vitamins, the antibiotics, the food waste, the light that never failed. She hated the words, even as she spoke them, hated how they left her lips like confessions of betrayal. But she spoke them anyway because silence felt crueler. The camp guards did not understand. They saw only prisoners sharing secrets, not realizing those secrets were not about military plans, but about production, about abundance, about the impossible truth of American strength. To Anna and the others, every detail mattered. They were cataloging their defeat in real time, measuring the gulf between two worlds, and with each measurement, their identities fractured further. By the time summer deepened, Anna no longer recognized herself. She looked in the mirror, a mirror provided in a prison camp, and saw color in her cheeks, weight on her frame, brightness in her eyes. She should have felt relief, even gratitude, but instead she felt consumed by guilt. Her body thrived, while her homeland crumbled. Her health improved, while her family wasted away in hunger and cold. The contrast was unbearable, and yet it was inescapable. The barracks became quieter as the weeks passed, not because the women had found peace, but because they had nothing left to argue. The truth had settled into their bones. The war was lost long before they had entered the camp, lost not to spirit or courage, but to factories, to systems, to abundance. And as Anna sat among them, the lamplight flickering across weary faces, she knew that this silent acceptance was more devastating than any battle. The soap had been the beginning, the food and medicine, the proof, but the whispered teachings in the barracks had cemented it. They were prisoners, not of America, but of truth itself, and there was no escape. The silence of acceptance did not bring peace. It was only the beginning of another torment, one that stretched beyond the fences of the camp. As the weeks dragged on, and whispers of Germany's collapse reached their ears, the women began to feel the weight of the future pressing down on them. Anna lay awake each night, staring at the rafters, her heart racing with dread. She knew she would one day be sent back to her homeland. But what kind of homeland would that be? The women spoke of ruins of hunger beyond imagining, of families scattered or gone. The thought clawed at her, because here she was, healthy, stronger than before, carrying the evidence of abundance on her very body, while the people she loved most dwindled in suffering. The barracks became a place of uneasy confessions. Women whispered about their fears of returning home, about how their families might look at them with suspicion rather than relief. Anna understood. She felt it in her own bones, the shame of survival. Her cheeks had color again, her body no longer gaunt, her teeth no longer aching with decay. How could she face her mother with this evidence of plenty? How could she explain that she had eaten better in captivity than her family had in freedom? The thought gnawed at her until her stomach turned with guilt, even as she swallowed each meal. Greta wept one night, clutching Anna's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. "They will think we betrayed them," she whispered. "They will see our weight, our strength, and they will not believe the truth. They will think we chose comfort while they starved." The word struck Anna like a blow. She imagined her father's face, proud and stern, hardening with accusation. She imagined her brother's eyes, hollow with hunger, narrowing at her well-fed frame. She could not silence the vision, and it burned inside her until she wanted to scream. At the same time, something else began to stir among the women, a restless urgency, a grim determination to remember everything they had witnessed. They began to speak of the systems of the factories, of the organization that made such abundance possible. What had once been whispers of despair turned into hushed lessons plans for a future none of them could clearly see, but all of them dreaded. Anna found herself listening, sometimes even joining in. They spoke not as prisoners, but as unwilling students cataloging truths they knew their homeland would need if it was ever to rise again. The irony twisted in her chest, here in defeat and captivity. They were gathering the very knowledge that might rebuild their country. Still, the fear of return overshadowed everything. Letters rare and censored trickled in with news of devastation. Entire neighborhoods gone, food rations cut to nothing, diseases spreading unchecked. Anna read them with trembling hands, the words blurring as tears filled her eyes. Her family's world was collapsing, and she would be expected to step back into that world carrying secrets of abundance they could scarcely imagine. She wondered if they would hate her for it, if they would ever forgive her for surviving in comfort while they endured fire and famine. The nights grew heavier with this knowledge. The barracks, once alive with whispers of disbelief, now echoed with sobs muffled into pillows, with prayers whispered through clenched teeth. Anna's dreams were haunted by the image of walking through Hamburg's ruins, her mother staring at her with hollow eyes, whispering, "How could you live so well while we suffered?" She woke each time with her heart pounding, drenched in sweat, unable to catch her breath. And yet beneath the grief, a strange clarity formed. The truth was undeniable. Germany had fallen not because its people lacked courage, but because it had been blind to the scale of its enemy's strength. That knowledge was a curse, but it was also a burden she could not ignore. Anna realized that when she returned, she could not remain silent. She would have to carry these truths home, no matter how bitter, no matter how much suspicion they drew. To hide them would be another betrayal, one her conscience could not endure. As August came, and the rumors of surrender hardened into fact, the camp changed again. The guards spoke more softly, the women moved more slowly, and everything seemed to hang suspended in unbearable tension. Anna felt her chest tighten with every passing day. She stood by the barracks window one evening, clutching the soap she still kept hidden like a talisman, and whispered to herself, "This is the proof, this is the burden, and I must carry it." Her voice trembled, but the words rang true. The war was ending. Her captivity would end. But the prison inside her heart would remain built, not of walls or fences, but of knowledge too heavy to release. The soap, the meals, the light, the medicine, all of it would follow her back across the ocean, haunting her steps through the rubble of her homeland. And she knew with a clarity that left her breathless that survival was only the beginning. The true test would come when she faced her people carrying both the shame of abundance and the unbearable duty of truth. Anna's journey inside the American camp was never just about survival. It was about watching her world collapse and another one rise in its place. From the first trembling moment with a bar of soap, to the endless trays of food, to the whispered reckonings in the barracks, every detail stripped away the lies she had been raised to believe. She and the other women carried the weight of abundance like chains, haunted by the knowledge that their homeland had lost long before they ever stepped behind the fences. And as surrender drew near, Anna understood that her captivity was ending, but the truth she carried would follow her forever. Now imagine standing in her shoes, returning home with the shame of survival and the burden of a secret that could reshape a broken nation. Would you speak of what you saw, or would you stay silent to avoid the scorn of those who suffered? Tell us what you would do. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see what awaited Anna when she finally stepped back onto German soil. The next chapter of her story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about war, survival, and truth.